and welcome everyone. Let me first tell you a little bit about Ariella Steinreich. And full disclosure, Ariella and I know each other for a number of years, and we worked together on some projects at the Orthodox Union, including a lot of communications and public relations for the security funding that came to New Jersey a few years ago in the wake of the Tree of Life synagogue tragedy. So full disclosure, we worked together, which is really why I wanted to have Ariella here, because I think she's a has a very fascinating story to tell, and is really on the ground in a place in the world that many of us, or most of us, have not been to yet, but I've heard a lot about in the last few years. So a little bit about Ariella, and then we'll hear her comments. There will be some questions and that I have, and then we'll try to open it up to the group. If you have questions that you want to ask as we're going along, you can type them in, and we'll try to ask as many as possible. So Ariella Steinreich is a prominent communications professional and strategic advisor in the US and the Middle East. She is a senior vice president at Steinreich Communications, where she leads the global corporate issues practice and the firm's Middle East division, I guess based out of Dubai. She creates and implements global communications and media relations programs for leading companies and organizations around the world. Ariella works closely with Israeli companies looking to do business in the Gulf cooperating countries, better known as the GCC, and also with GCC companies looking to do business in Israel. She's also a founding member of the UAE Israel Business Council and of the Gulf Israel Women's Forum. She's originally from New Jersey. She now resides in Dubai. She attended Yavne Academy in Paramus as in her elementary school years, and Mayanot High School, Yeshiva High School for Girls in Teaneck, before attending college in Manhattan. It founded in 2003, Steinreich Communication represents some of the world's leading corporations and consumer brands. It's one of the nation's fastest growing full-service public relations firms, with offices in New York, New Jersey, Washington, Los Angeles, High Point, London, Frankfurt, Tel Aviv, and of course, Dubai. So I know there is a member of the press in the Jewish link. The only thing I would request of the press is if there are any other folks, we are recording this session. If there's any comments that Ariella makes that she says are off the record, we would just request that you keep them off the record. With that, let me introduce Ariella Steinreich. And Ariella, if you could just kind of give us a little bit of background as to what your area of the world where you live now, what did it look like several years ago, 10 years ago, and what does it look like now?
Sure. Well, thank you first for having me today at the bright early hour of 4:07 a.m. It's a pleasure to be with you all. And I apologize for my voice. I'm still recovering from a little bit of a cough that I had when I was back home for the Chagim. But yeah, look, in terms of what the region looked like before and then kind of transitioning to what it looks like afterwards, there were a lot of signs in probably about the year and a half leading up to the Accords that something was going on. Bahrain hosted what was called the Peace to Prosperity workshop, which was actually really, it was organized by the US, by Jared Kushner. And what we later found out, it was the unveiling really of the economic portion of the peace plan. And you could already feel in the room that there were things going on. There were a lot of heads of state that were coming from all different countries within the GCC themselves, not even only Accord countries, or now that we know are Accord countries, but you knew something was going on. It was actually during that same period where the first Shacharis minyan in the synagogue happened in decades, and it was really, really amazing. You had people from the White House, you had rabbis who were in attendance, and really just large Jewish communal leaders who had all come for that conference, and that was really nice to be able to share something with the local Jewish community. And then in May and June, right before the Accords, the UAE, really in the height of COVID, they sent 2 plane loads of COVID aid to help the Palestinians, but of course that has to be in conjunction with Israel, with the Israeli side, to make sure that's allowed in. So already I would say people knew something was coming up, and so that led to a lot of the buzz of what's happening. And I think that for many of us who have been following this space closely for years, we'll all kind of remember that moment on August 13th, when all of a sudden we saw on Twitter that it was happening, and it was tweeted that now the UAE and Israel would be establishing a relationship. And it really kicked off a cascading effect that then led into 1 month later, Bahrain going, and then in December, Morocco, and then Sudan. And now it's really led to a whole new Middle East. These countries have come together. They've, many of you have heard of the Negev Summit. They've created their own forum. They've identified areas of collaboration. And now we see other countries who are also, seem to be interested in trying to join up, because at the end of the day, it's brought a lot of opportunity for their countries, for their people. And it's really just a wonderful thing all around.
Can you just tell us about the region? Because many of us have never been there. What are the religions in those countries? What languages are spoken? How do they relate to Western culture? Things like that. Absolutely.
So in terms of the religion, obviously the religion in all these countries, and Josh referenced before the Gulf, the Gulf cooperation countries. And that includes, if you kind of go down and around, it includes Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, Oman, and Kuwait. And so obviously they're all Muslim countries. Excuse me. However, Bahrain is actually home to the first and the only indigenous Jewish community. So the Jews in Bahrain date back to the 1880s. They also have a big Christian community. The Pope is actually arriving on Wednesday night. That's a big deal. That's the second time the Pope has ever come to the region. The first time was actually here in Abu Dhabi in the UAE in 2019. And so, it's definitely, these are, for sure they're Muslim countries, but they do have, Christians and Jews. Actually, now we'll talk about it probably a little later on, but now actually every one of these countries has a Jewish community. They vary in size, and by community, I can mean 12 people, and I can mean a few thousand. And that really kind of depends on the country, but all they're very open to all religions. There's obviously a big, Hindu communities here as well. Bahrain has a Baha'i community, which is very interesting. Many of them visited Israel because obviously there's a Baha'i community there as well. And I think in terms of kind of cultural, there's been a lot of changes probably over, the last 10, 15 years as more Gulfies, as they call themselves, have gone to the West for their higher education, because then they meet, fellow Americans, they meet Europeans, they meet British. Many of them have gone to school with Jewish people, which I think also probably led in terms of like, why now? And they've seen that there's much more that, that we have more similarities than, that divides us. And so you see a lot of, similar cultural things, a lot of the same music we listen to on the radio in America, we listen to on the radio here. Social media is just as rampant here as it is there. There's a lot of interest in American TV shows. Actually, a lot of my friends from the Gulf, before the Accords, were watching shows like Fauda and some of the other Israeli shows on Netflix. Obviously, they're all big fans of Tehran, like many of us. And so I think that, in many ways, especially, some of the countries like the UAE and Bahrain, and they're very much kind of in line with Western at this point.
So you were talking about the timing of this. I mean, why was this specifically the right time for the Accords to happen? What was happening that made this just the right time?
Sure. So look, I think kind of going back to what I just said before, the fact that so many of them were educated in the West, and that they went to university and they sat in classes and they worked on projects with Jewish people, they had a much greater understanding that we're really much more similar than maybe we would think. And so when you go through those experiences, and then you come back home and you go into business and you go into various fields, and it's time to, collaborate with others, et cetera. Already, even before the Accords, already a lot of them were doing business collaborations, or in the innovation and tech space. A lot of them were already doing stuff with Israeli technology. You don't realize, but so much of your network goes back to your university days. In fact, I'll tell you just kind of the flip to that is that I was actually in Morocco with a client a few months back, and I met with the American Consul General's office. And one of the things we were talking about is the fact that, perhaps with more, if more Moroccans went to American universities, they would also have a similar network as well. Because, out here, for example, many of the leadership have gone to school in the States. So then when their peers are thinking about setting up businesses in the Middle East, where should I make it my hub? They say, oh, I was in class with, that gentleman who now has become the crown prince or whomever. And so they feel much more comfortable, kind of doing something here. So higher ed and those networks that we create in that environment play a very big role as well.
On the ground, how did the Accords change the UAE, Bahrain, the other countries, Sudan? I think, and has it been equal or equivalent in the various different countries, or have some countries been more active than others? How does it play out on the ground?
Sure. So it definitely changes depending on the country. Here in the UAE, there's been massive business boom. I mean, they estimate that in 2021, it was about 1.2 billion with a B in terms of, $1.2 billion of business that was done. There's hundreds of thousands of tourists. It's pretty impossible to walk into a hotel and not hear Hebrew these days. In May, the UAE and Israel signed what's colloquially called the SEPA, but it stands for the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which is expected to boost the annual bilateral trade to more than $10 billion within 5 years, which is a very big deal. And on the cultural side, we've obviously had even more kosher restaurants that have opened up in order to accommodate all the tourists that are coming in. We actually had the opening of the first Holocaust exhibit here, which is really pretty incredible as well. And I think on the Bahrain side, again, we've got, tons of tourists that are coming in. There's 3 flights per week at this point, and that was just increased. By the way, on the flight side, the UAE it's almost impossible at this point to count how many, but Emirates, which just launched only a few months back, has actually now doubled their flights. So they went from 7, I think, to 14 flights a week. But back to Bahrain for a second. Again, we've got the same, trade deals. The first ever Yom HaAtzmaut event to take place in the Arab world happened this past May in Bahrain, which is pretty incredible. And in terms of, again, just more holistically how it changes, there is a different narrative going on in the region. And it's a narrative of, we have new friends in the region. I think for Israel, things have changed. Now they have real friends, they have real neighbors in the region. They don't have to feel like they're necessarily alone, and kind of that's a big deal. You see it even in the way that the interactions are happening.
You mentioned there's obviously a lot of Israeli and Jewish tourism to that area now. Does it go the other way? Are people in the Gulf region visiting Israel, and what are they looking at, and how does that play out? What does that look like?
Look, I think it's probably one of the coolest things that I've heard so far, which is, for many of us, we've gone to Israel however many times in our lives, but it's really interesting to hear about their first experiences. That includes, by the way, it includes Jewish people from this region. It includes Muslims from this region who maybe haven't gone before, and it's really interesting to hear from them. I mean, they're really excited. They're excited before. They're excited when they come back. Actually, most of the ones that I know who have gone have now gone multiple times since. I don't know anybody who's only gone once. They really have fallen in love with the people, the culture, the food, and they've really become ambassadors with the lowercase a for this whole partnership. And I think that's what's been really cool, is many of them are young adults, which means they have their whole lives ahead of them to keep kind of being these ambassadors for this relationship. When they open their own businesses, they're doing stuff together. I have a friend in Bahrain who's a Muslim woman who started the first ever Hebrew language online course specifically for Gulfies. It's called the Shemot Academy. And there's young Muslim men and women who are learning Hebrew, and their Hebrew is really good, by the way, to the point where when they send voice notes thinking they can practice with me, I sometimes say, oh, if they go a little further, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to hold out. So their Hebrew is really good, like really, really good. Some of them actually can watch TV and listen to radio in Hebrew, which is pretty impressive. But I think a lot of it also goes, again, to the business and the cultural elements, that they've really enjoyed their experiences there. And then they bring it back with them. And they're, again, they post it on their social media, which helps, because if you think about it, it only expands the opportunity even more, right? So if every person has a few hundred followers and then they sit there and they story on Instagram, that's a few hundred more people who say to themselves, maybe that's a place I want to go as well.
Can you talk about the role of women in society? I think maybe there's a perception in the West of, what things look like in that region. Talk about the role of women in society. You're obviously a businesswoman who's, successful and living in that society.
Sure. So look, I think it depends a little bit on the kind of, you have to go country by country, if you will. But here in the UAE, 50% of positions in the national parliament are all females. 27% of ministers in the cabinet are females. Many companies here have female CEOs. There is, I don't recall the specific requirement, but there is a requirement that companies with boards have to have a certain percentage of their board be female. And that number, I know in the last, I think, year or two, they just came out that it's doubled, which is pretty incredible. In Bahrain, probably most people on this call don't realize, but women in Bahrain have been able to vote before they were able to vote in America, which is really quite interesting. And then again, I think you kind of see it in different countries in different ways. In Saudi, women have their role is obviously increasing tremendously. There was actually just something that came out recently in terms of, again, trying to create corporate environments that are very friendly for women. The Saudi ambassador to America is a woman, Princess Rima. You're definitely seeing more women in diplomacy as well, which is in many ways actually quite natural in terms of kind of the skill sets and the demeanor that we bring to the table. So you've seen that now kind of across the board. Bahrain has had now a number of female ambassadors. They've had one to the States, and actually to this day, she's also the first and the only Jewish ambassador from an Arab country, and she was posted in the States from 2008 to 2013, which is pretty incredible. The UAE has many female ambassadors. Oman actually had the first female ambassador to America as well, years and years back. And so I think it kind of depends on the country, but overall, I think anybody who would have a perception that, women didn't have, kind of equality in that sense here would have a misconception on that.
Interesting. So I know that the folks in that region do watch America, I guess, other cultures, they see what's going on in America. And I guess, to be frank, there's a lot that's going on in America that's not pretty, whether it's, gun violence, racism, political division, divisiveness, anti-Semitism. What do they think about America? Do you get those same kind of issues in the areas that you travel to?
So you don't. You don't get those issues here. Another thing people might be interested to learn is we don't have any anti-Semitism here. So the last 2 years, when there's been challenges during different periods in Israel between the Israelis and the Palestinians, it was pretty horrifying to see videos and photos coming out of Manhattan, or hearing that men in Manhattan didn't want to wear their kippot outside. They were scared. We don't face that here for a variety of factors. But at the end of the day, truly in the Emirates, the people here are really quite peaceful. And I think what was pretty spectacular while those things were going on in the States is to see how many Emiratis would reach out to people who they knew, let's say, were from New York, and say, is everybody okay in your family? Like there really was a lot of concern, and there still is when they see things like that. It's definitely hard to explain to them why we have gun violence, and why guns are so easily accessible in the States. It's not something that's the case here, and it's some of that stuff is a little hard to relate to as well. Now, again, many of them have gone to school in the States or in the UK. And so they still have connections there. So they're very well informed of what goes on, but it's really a different world. And I think that for many of the Jewish people who have either moved here or again, the ones who have been here originally in Bahrain, it's really hard to swallow when you watch these anti-Semitic attacks that happen in other countries. And we're very appreciative of the fact that we don't have that issue here. In fact, it's not even like it's in a neutral stage. I mean, it's just so polar opposite. Here we have locals who completely support Jewish life. They join for Shabbos, they come for meals, they come for shul, they come to almost every Jewish community event, almost any event that the Israelis do, whether it's consulate, embassy, etc. You will always find Emiratis, and it's very strange, I think, to everybody, those types of things. But I think America will always be America, in that there'll always be high regard for it, and that everybody recognizes that sometimes the pendulum switches. So right now it might be a little bit of a more challenging side, but everybody hopes that we'll get through this portion quite quickly and move on to your pastures.
Before, you meant there are Jewish communities in many of these countries, some as little as 12 and some more robust. Can you talk about Jewish life? What does Shabbat look like? What is your Jewish experience living in that part of the world?
Sure. So I guess I'll start with the first more broad question about what Jewish life is like. So the largest Jewish community is definitely in the Emirates. The big hub is in Dubai. For those who are not familiar with the UAE, I always say the UAE is kind of like the USA, right? The United Arab Emirates, the United States of America. So we have different emirates. We would have different states in America. And so the largest Jewish community is based in Dubai. And then there's now a growing Jewish community as well in Abu Dhabi. In Dubai, we've got, I think, about 6 kosher restaurants at this point. We went from having only fleishik to somehow getting 2 new milchig ones all in one summer, which is quite exciting. And so there's a mikveh, there's a Jewish preschool already in Dubai. They're building a Jewish day school kind of campus in Abu Dhabi. There are many, many minyanim that go on Shabbos, kind of all over town. So there's different areas that people will stay in, or people who live here that they live in. So there's kind of a minyan in each of these locations. We are getting a new and our first kosher grocery store, which is quite exciting. And the first shul will be finished this year in Abu Dhabi. It's actually, the government has created something called the Abrahamic Family House, which will be one campus that houses both a shul, a church, and a mosque. And so that will be the first one, which is quite exciting. In terms of Bahrain, as we talked about, it's the only indigenous Jewish community. They date back to the 1880s. They've got the oldest and currently the only functional shul in the GCC, as well as the only, the only functioning Jewish cemetery in the GCC as well. And actually, you spoke a little bit before about how we got to know each other. And so I guess in November of 2020, we actually introduced the Ritz-Carlton of Bahrain to the OU, and the Ritz had an extra kitchen that wasn't being used, and the OU consulted with them in terms of how they could make that the kosher kitchen. And so now the Ritz actually has a kosher kitchen. It's locked up, obviously, when it is in use, but what they do is they bring in a mashgiach, and then it's actually the Ritz chefs who prepare all these meals. And then they kind of keep them on hand for when there are guests who would like them. I think you have to give like 24 hours notice, we usually do. And then you can get one of these meals. They had the first Jewish wedding in 52 years in Bahrain that took place there, in the hotel as well. So things are really happening. The first bar mitzvah in 16 years happened in August of 2021 as well. So things are definitely happening there. In terms of Saudi Arabia, that's kind of the big question. There's always, everybody always wants to know about Saudi. So there are Jews there. They're mainly expat Jews, which means that they're Jews from other countries who have work. The same is in Kuwait as well. Oman also has that. Oman and Kuwait are probably some of the more smaller Jewish communities. And then Qatar, which is actually going to host the World Cup in a couple weeks, they also have they have a very small Jewish community, the majority of whom are there as part of the university system. So there's something called the Qatar Foundation, which is kind of an amalgamation of all top tier universities, many of which are actually from the States. And so they've got professors and students that are there as well. And the American military has about 1,000 Jewish people stationed in the GCC as well. So that's been a really, really wonderful experience for them to get to know the local Jewish community and vice versa. And then in February of 2021, the Jews of all these countries came together and they said, let's create something called the Association of Gulf Jewish Communities. And the thinking is that every community can kind of keep its own identity, but if they come together, they could share resources to help one another. So it's much easier, for example, to ship matzah into the UAE, and then from the UAE to ship a box to this part of Saudi and to ship 4 boxes to this part of Kuwait, et cetera. And so that was the creation of the AGJC, which has really changed Jewish life in this region for the better. And actually right now they're celebrating their first anniversary, I think on Monday. But last October, they launched the first Jewish dating website, which everybody always wants to know about that. And to this day, there's over 200 people that are registered on there, which goes to show that there really are a lot of people out here. And the thinking is that there's so many Jewish singles out here for work. Well, what if we were able to introduce them and then they had children out here? That would increase the need for Jewish day schools. That means we need more kosher food, right? So in a way that could help to kind of propel Jewish life forward. But today it's very comfortable being a Jew in all of these countries. We actually had 2 gentlemen come in and bake matzah this year before Yontif, which was really wonderful. They shipped 775 pounds of matzah this year into the UAE to again be kind of shared all over the GCC. So that goes to show the need that's here.
Are there Chabad houses? Are there rabbis that are stationed there? Like, who are the leaders? The religious leaders in these countries, in these Jewish communities.
Absolutely. So I think in the UAE, kind of have something for everyone. We've got Sephardi, we've got Ashkenazi, we do have Chabad. So there's kind of all different. There's some place for everyone, which is really, really nice. In Bahrain, there's one shul, and so yeah, that's the opportunity there. And the other ones don't have minions yet. Obviously, we talk about the accords. Not all these countries have yet to sign the accords. So it tends to be that the countries that have signed the accords have larger Jewish communities, larger needs, and greater infrastructure.
So will there be a need for, a shochet, a moel, rabbis, teachers? What kind of needs do you see in terms of the Jewish community in the next few years?
So I think for the moment that the 4 is in Saudi, Qatar, Kuwait, and Oman. I think probably if I'm looking at kind of the next couple of years, I think that they'll probably continue to grow in the same way that they have now, and that people come for work, maybe they meet kind of one another, but it's a little bit more on the DL, as we would say. It's a little bit quieter. I think that the UAE, kind of with all things in the UAE, Jewish community or not, they kind of grow much larger and much quicker than you ever really expect. And so I have a feeling that within the next 5 years, we will for sure see, Jewish day schools opening up. I mean, that's going to be kind of the big need, because as you now have more people moving in with children, they want their kids to have, a Jewish education. It's important to them. So, currently, like I said, there's a nursery program, like a preschool. There's also like a Sunday option for kids who are already enrolled in other schools here, and older kids, in Dubai. But I think that there'll definitely be a greater need for Jewish education. And I think that we're on the food side. I dare say we're covered because it keeps growing. But most people, by the way, on the food side, I think a lot of people would be intrigued to know the Burj Khalifa, that tall building that you see every time you, think Dubai, you see that in your head. That's actually where the first kosher restaurant ever went in. It's really important to them. So I think we'll see more restaurants pop up, if I have to make a prediction, because, We like our food. We now officially have a pizza shop, so we have Jewish community status all around.
You made it.
But yeah, we made it. But I think we'll just continue to see it grow. And I think that in Bahrain, I think that we will see it grow. It's a little bit, to the point you made earlier, some countries have moved a little bit quicker than others. But we'll see that grow as well. It will come in time with kind of more groups that are coming and more tourists. But there's been a lot of groups that have come not just from Israel. Now we're really kind of in the first post-COVID season after the Accords. And so there's delegations coming almost every week to this region, many of which are coming from the States, whether it's shul groups, whether it's Jewish community organization groups. But this is definitely where everybody's headed for this season. And it's exciting because with that brings a lot of opportunity. And some of those people who come will identify, other areas where there's, where we could grow.
So you have a background, you came from New Jersey, which is where we're all from. You went to Yeshiva Day School, Yeshiva High School. And of course you were in the Gulf region before all of these, before the Abraham Accords, well before them, doing work. How do you think your Yeshiva Day School and high school education kind of prepared you for this really different kind of career that, nice Jewish girls don't necessarily go into? But no, seriously, how did that, do you think, prepared you for this kind of work?
So I'm not sure that in high school I would have seen, I don't know if I would have, I don't know if in high school I would have known I would have ended up here. But I definitely wouldn't have known that the Accords would happen. I mean, 2 weeks, before, kind of we got word, I didn't know it was going to happen either. So, I'm not sure I could have predicted it then either. But look, I think in general, one of the things that we were taught in high school, and I went to my note, was that you identify a place where you can contribute your talent, or where you can contribute that, is in line with your passions. And I think that it goes to the point of trying to find your own small way to help make the world a better place. So the opportunity really to help in whatever way that I can to usher in these accords, and what I like to call this new Middle East, is really, it's an honor and it's a privilege.
So people can start putting things into the chat box if you want in terms of questions. Just a couple more things. One is, what's next? I mean, obviously things have happened that are kind of remarkable, and you've witnessed it on the ground. Obviously the Saudis have been in the news lately. Will the Saudis come on board? What do you think the future holds in terms of other countries joining kind of in this process in a more public way, perhaps? And I guess sometimes we've heard that there have been, back channel or maybe business done quietly, but, are other countries likely to come on and join in the future? What's your crystal ball?
So my answer to that is yes. I don't know if it'll be called the Abraham Accords, obviously, because in a way, the Abraham Accords were kind of like a set. It was like a specific, time period. They all did it. I don't know if with the new administration, in the White House, I don't know if it would still be called the Abraham Accords, but yeah, I do think that that these countries will all come on board, and it's an obvious calculation, right? You have a boon to trade. You've got more tourists that are coming in, and then you have opportunities for young people and the opportunity for them to be involved in much more well-connected Middle East. So I think the answer is yes, 100%. They'll all come on board. And yes, I get the Saudi question on the daily, as we say. And yeah, Saudi will come on board. Look, all these countries, before they jump to establishing a relationship with Israel, they all focus on Muslim-Jewish relations, right? It's the interfaith dialogue component. And so we've already seen the Saudis start doing that already, right before the Accords. Actually, there were kind of 3 large Jewish groups that went in January, February, and March, right before everything shut down of 2020. But it's also important to remember that Saudi only opened its doors to tourism in September of 2019. So I think that they will for sure come on board. They're with all countries, there's kind of, a decision that has, in terms of the timing and whatnot. And I think that more broadly for these 4 countries that are in the GCC that have yet to come on board, I think it's really a question of timing and when they'll do it. Obviously, there are people who say if this one does and this one will, etc. But back to the Saudi part, I think it's also really important to understand that the King of Saudi Arabia is the custodian of the 2 great mosques. And in a way, the kingdom is really kind of the capital for Islam. So if Saudi Arabia, when they come on board, it could also help bring more of the 57 Muslim countries in the world for them to come on board, because they really do play a key role in that. So, Saudi coming on board could have an impact on, let's say, Indonesia or Malaysia, some of the largest, Muslim countries in the world. So it will happen. There's absolutely no question about that. I mean, we see many Jewish delegations from the States that have now gone, again, post-COVID. I'm sure you all read the same things that I read about Israeli groups that are going. And so I think we're living in a world today where people recognize that opportunities outweigh maybe kind of some of the old school thinking. So if you have a large population of young people like they do in Saudi Arabia, I mean, the majority of the country are young people, and you need to provide opportunities and jobs for those kids. And they're going to the States and they're studying with Jewish people. And maybe they met an Israeli when they did so. It makes sense that some of that now carries back. So yeah, absolutely, it will happen.
Actually, somebody wanted to know what initially brought you to the UAE, and I know the answer, but I'll let you speak about it.
Sure. So, like all good Jewish girls, oil and gas. That's even before I joined the current firm that I'm with, I was working on oil and gas. There's kind of two areas that are pretty big here: oil and gas and financial PR. And so my last agency, I was doing a bunch of stuff, and that's really kind of where I got introduced to this region, and I've stayed ever since.
Fair enough. There are a lot of questions in the chat room about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and I guess the question isn't to whatever extent you can respond is, do you see this as maybe being beneficial in terms of these countries maybe helping mediate? I mean, how do you see these accords helping improve that situation, if at all?
Sure. So look, first and foremost, I'm not an expert on Middle East peace. So I would refer you probably to somebody else on that matter. But I think that it's important to kind of to remember why these countries did what they did. Did I freeze on your screen?
You did, but we can hear you.
Okay, hold on. I'm going to quickly put the camera off and on, and let's see if that makes a difference.
Okay.
So, I think it's important to think about why these countries did it. They did it for their people. They did it for the opportunities it would provide for their people and for the region, and honestly, globally. I mean, there's global impact off the back of this, and I think that they've been very clear on where they stand in terms of wanting to make sure that the Palestinians are also taken care of, that they are also part of their consideration. They continue to send aid and they continue to try to help, but they also recognize that this is the time and this is the place to be part of a more connected Middle East and to create the new Middle East. I always say that the accords were created and they were signed by really bold leaders here in the region who wanted to create a better future for their people, but also their next generation. And if we do this right, then the next generation really will never know that there was a chasm before between these countries. And so that's really what this is about. It's about recognizing the opportunity for their own people. And of course they want the best for others in the region, but that also can't hold up the opportunities that they provide for their people.
Right. So I think next week is this coming week, there's going to be an election for a change in Israel. And I guess I'm wondering if the people, in those countries have a favorite candidate. Do they follow Israeli politics closely, or is that just something in another country? How do people view the, Israeli political scene?
Sure. So again, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in that area, but I tell you from my own friends, it's not a conversation that comes up. It's interesting. People here are not really kind of, they don't kind of gossip, if you will, about other countries and their political situations. They just don't do that. I'm sure there are some, kind of one-offs, but on the whole, yeah, it's not a conversation that's come up, I could say, at any of the dinners or, even Shabbos meals I've had over the last few weeks. So
the outcome of the election won't really impact anything as far as the Abraham Accords are concerned from your perspective. It just, everything is business as usual, or do you see any, do you have any concerns?
look, I think that, throughout history, there have been many treaties that have been signed between countries. And it doesn't change, if there's a solid foundation, if the bones are good, it doesn't really change. It's not about the people who signed them. It's about it's about the people that it's impacting. And I think that here, what's been so incredible, you often hear about warm peace versus, let's say, peace that Israel had with Egypt and with Jordan. What's really cool about what's gone on here with the Abraham Accords is that the leaders signed it, but the people really helped to execute it, right? So, and by the way, in many ways, I mean, that's the natural way for this to happen. The leaders say, okay, we've signed, go forth, and now we've got opportunities in business and in culture and kind of in everything, but it's about the people, and the people have really taken the reins and said that they want to help steer the ship, which everybody here is totally on board with when it comes to the Accords. So as a result, it's not about the people. By the way, we've had other changes, just to be frank. I mean, we almost, on the US side, on the Israel side, we've already had changes in terms of administration vis-a-vis the Accords and where we are now. And it hasn't really had an impact, because again, now it's up for the people to move it forward, the diplomatic emissaries, aka ambassadors, who are helping to kind of connect the dots between the ecosystems in their countries. And so I don't think that it'll impact it.
So I think you spoke before about how the people that helped, the Americans that helped create these accords, did their thing, and then they left, and now it's up to the people in those countries to kind of make it all happen. Has America kind of checked in? Have other countries checked in just to see how things are going? Or is it kind of like they've done their thing, they've left, and now it's really up to the people? How does that work?
I wouldn't say America's left either, to be frank. I think America's involved, but again, there's when we're talking about, the relationship between the UAE and Israel, it is a bilateral relationship, right? Like, meaning they're signing the SEPA deal. There's obviously discussions, and that, this is public. I mean, Reuters has reported it, that Bahrain and Israel are now talking about a free trade agreement. So the point is that is between those two countries. But I don't think the Americans have kind of checked out. I think they're very much there. They're trying to respectfully play the role that they should after being the conveners. But I mean, I'll say that to that point. I mean, I was at there's something called AmCham, and it has chapters all over the world. The American Chamber of Commerce, and we're members of AmCham Bahrain. And one of the first speeches that I heard from the new U.S. ambassador to Bahrain, who's actually also a fellow member of the tribe and from New Jersey, and he said very, very clearly that this is a priority for him, and he said it in no uncertain terms. I think the Americans still are involved, but they also want to respectfully let the two parties figure out what makes sense for their country when it comes to a partnership.
Right. I guess there's a lot of conversation about Iran, and I guess the question is, do the folks in that area of the world have, the same concerns that maybe some of their, that America does, that Israel does? I guess, is that part of some of their day-to-day concerns?
Sure. I see we're pulling all the punches for the questions today, which I love. But yes, Iran is Iran is definitely a hot topic around here. And it's depending on the country. It's obviously some countries are more concerned than others, but I mean, it is in many ways. I think a lot of the defense collaboration that you see is tied to that. I think everybody feels comfortable now knowing that they have an additional partner, when it comes to trying to keep the region peaceful. And that's important for everybody, by the way. I think around, all across the board, everybody wants that, including the US. And obviously the US has a lot of bases around here. Everybody wants it to remain calm. But it's, Israel, like I said, Israel really, for the first time ever, has real friends and partners in the region, who it can call upon. And it's something I think that these guys here also really appreciate, the fact that they have, Israel's, Israel's intelligence is very well known. Like I said, they watch all the good TV shows, so they know. And so I think that, again, the fact that now we have kind of a brotherhood out here, everybody feels more comfortable. But yes, Iran is definitely, something that is talked about for sure.
Okay. I'm just gonna ask folks that do want to ask questions, if you can just type it into the chat room, that would be great. If you absolutely want to ask a question, with a voice question, we'll try to do that as well. So next month, we're actually not quite November yet, but in a few weeks it'll be Hanukkah. And when we think of Hanukkah, we think about miracles, and it just seems that this whole process, based on how you're describing it, based on everything that we've heard, has been really nothing short of miraculous. So as we approach this Hanukkah season, is there any what's the most what's the greatest nace, let's say, that you've seen, or something that you've said, wow, I can't believe I'm living in this time, in this place? What kind of stands out to you as something miraculous?
I think the thing about miracles is that it's actually up to us, it's up to us to recognize them, whether they're big and small, and recognize the fact that big or small, they're really equal. And so, for me, there are many miracles when we talk about the Abraham Accords. I mean, the Abraham Accords in and of themselves were a miracle. Can
you hear me? You just froze. Okay.
Chat her directly.
Oh. Okay. Folks, we'll see if we can get this fixed. Okay, we're going to try to get this back up and running. She may have lost connection. Oh, it kicked. Okay. She's trying to get back in, so just bear with us, guys.
Yeah, just be a minute, guys, and we'll hopefully she'll be able to.
Yeah. Do you want to open it up to Ellie's question? Because I don't see it typed in. Just unmute.
We can, but she's not going to hear it yet. As soon as
right. So I'll just try to repeat when she comes back. But just figured we get it.
Ellie, I'll unmute you for question.
Yeah.
Okay, this is Silverman.
Okay, it's Kay.
Oh, hi, Kay. We can't hear you. You're also breaking up. Kay, we can't really hear you, so I don't know if you want to type it in. It might be better.
Can you hear?
You're breaking up in and out.
Audio's not good.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Yes, now we can.
Can you now hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
From your perspective, has there been a definite example or any set of examples where technology is being shared between these countries and Israel, or these countries in America, or all of the above? So is there some technology synergy we could hear about?
Okay, if Ariella is back, Mark, if you can unmute her. I don't know if Ariella heard the question. The question was whether or not there's been examples of technology that's been shared, between Israel and these other countries. And, do you have any specific examples? And Mark, if you could just mute everybody else, that'd be great.
Sure. And I'm coming to you now from my phone. I don't know why it kicked me off before. But yeah, there's a lot of technology that's going on, specifically in the healthcare space, in the fintech space. We actually have some Israeli companies that have opened up here as well. And there's numbers on that. I just don't have them necessarily, right in front of me, but yes, definitely 100%. There's some stuff going on in the climate and agri-tech space. Interesting, but agri-tech is like a very big point of similarity between the two countries, in that we face a lot of the same climate challenges, and so this is something where we're seeing a lot of collaboration. And those, I would say, are kind of the main ones that come to mind at the moment.
Right. I think we lost you in the middle of the miracles answer, so people really would love to hear what you have to say about the miraculous.
Sorry.
Okay, no, it's okay.
Now I hope it lives up to whatever everybody thought it was going to be. But I guess my response to that is that I think it's up to us to identify the miracles, both big and small, and to realize that they're really equal in this case. So what I was saying before, I don't know where I got cut off, but I remember even just kind of, when it was announced, running and saying, oh my gosh, it happened. That in and of itself was a miracle. I think for people like me who've been here before the Accords, seeing men walk around, Dubai with their kippot on is also a miracle. Obviously, the first time an Israeli president, prime minister, foreign minister all came to the UAE, it was huge. In Bahrain, having, again, the prime minister and the foreign minister was huge. So it's kind of up to each person to identify, what miracle speaks to them. But again, I mean, I would argue, having Yom Ha'atzmaut in the Gulf is a miracle also in and of itself. And by the way, I'll tell you a funny story on the Yom Ha'atzmaut thing. So I had to be in Morocco for a client event, and there was no way I was going to miss the Yom Ha'atzmaut in Bahrain. So the only way, literally the only flight to take that would get me from Morocco to Bahrain and land an hour and a half before the event was to go through Saudi Arabia. So my joke was, as long as they don't ask me what I'm going to Bahrain for, I'll be fine. But the point is, that was literally the only flight I could take. There was no other option. But look, to be honest, I mean, celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut in Bahrain with hundreds of Bahrainis was absolutely incredible. And to the point I mentioned earlier about them all loving Fauda, it was only better because Sachi Halevi actually came in for the event, and they had a chef from Israel who flew in to create his masterful Israeli cuisine. So they all got to try that. So I think all these things are miracles. I mean, the fact that the Ritz-Carlton has such a deep commitment to making sure that Jewish guests would feel comfortable there, and to partner with the OU on this. I mean, again, that's another one. There really are kind of a million miracles, but I think for me, the one that stands out the most is the fact that, like I said, now people feel really comfortable to walk around with kippot and visually identify as Jewish. And to be very clear, there was no concern about that before, in that there was no risk, but I think people just feel more comfortable now doing it.
I think one of the questions here, I think I know the answer because I think you've spoken about this a little bit, that what was there before the Abraham Accords, was there, or many years ago, was there anti-Semitism and, in these countries, and did it evolve? But it almost seems like from your answers before that it really didn't necessarily exist in your view.
So look, no, in recent years, there definitely wasn't. I think, look, everybody kind of can do their own homework and see that, in years past, there was concerns in some of these countries about what was included in textbooks. That's pretty open at this point. But, what's actually interesting is textbooks here get printed yearly. So it's actually kind of fairly, like, it doesn't take as long time as, let's say, in the States to kind of change out textbooks. So there's definitely been a lot of change on that front. But look, these guys are all, they're open about the fact that they've gone through their own change process on this. And I think that, with every situation like this in life, right, there are many people go through changes as well. And so I think it's important that we focus on kind of the here and the now, as opposed to going, and looking backwards. And not every country has had those challenges. Obviously, look, education plays a really big role. It goes back to what I said before, though. Like, if we do this right, the next generation will never know there was a rift. And for me, in terms of, I often get asked, like, what motivates me? But I just think that it's really for that next generation. I mean, I have a nephew who's 4 years old, and I've said this before, like, and granted he's American, but like, I just think it's so cool for him to grow up thinking that this region was always kind of on the same page. And God willing, by the time he does grow up, the other countries will come on board. And so, it really will be much more of a regional thing. But for the moment, I think that it's, incredibly powerful, the ones who have already kind of taken up the mantle, and they said, we're going to be leaders in this change. And that's kind of, it's a miracle in and of itself.
I'm just curious, you mentioned before about the Israeli companies opening up, locations in those countries. Are they employing Israelis, locals, or a mixture? How does that look? What does it look like?
Sure. So it's a combination of both. It's funny, somebody, again, to that question about tech, it's no secret that Israel has a tech shortage. A human capital and tech shortage. They don't have enough people. So what's been interesting is that there've been a few articles about some companies who have opened up here in the UAE because it affords them the opportunity to recruit talent from other countries who maybe wouldn't necessarily be comfortable working in Israel. So that's been really interesting. There's a place here called the DIFC, the Dubai International Financial Center. And it's fascinating. You can literally walk the halls and just hear Hebrew. Like there really are Israeli companies who have opened up here. And obviously when they open up here, they're Emirati companies, right? Which again, from a geopolitical perspective works out well because you can employ many nationalities into these companies. We have I-24, you guys probably are aware. So they've got a bureau here. They also have a partnership in Bahrain, in Morocco. And what's interesting is I have a lot of Moroccan journalists that have actually asked me if I could connect them with I-24. Like there really is an interest on both sides to work together. And I think that very often when we talk about this relationship, we often talk about kind of Israel's desire to jump in, et cetera. But it really is matched from the other sides, which is exciting.
Yeah. So it's 9 o'clock. I don't see any other questions in the chat that we haven't covered, but I do want to say that this has been fascinating. I think everybody who was on the call is really learned a lot. It's eye-opening. This whole process, I'm sure, is going to evolve and continue to grow and change over time. And maybe someday we'll have you back, maybe even in person. But if there are no other questions, I think I'll. So do you have any, last minute comments that you want to leave us with, or do you want to invite us to have Shabbat dinner with you sometime? How do we get there?
Absolutely, you're all invited. I would suggest flying, not swimming. But yes, you're all absolutely invited. And what I would tell you is that it definitely feels far away, especially the 14.5-hour flight is quite long, but you could pair it very nicely with a trip to Israel. A lot of people actually did that over Chol Hamoed. They came. I have very good friends of mine who actually flew to Israel for a wedding last week, and then today they'll arrive for kind of 2 full days, and then they'll head back Wednesday to the States. I know there are a bunch of people doing this for winter break as well. So yes, it's far, but once you're in Israel, what's another 3 hours? It's all good. But I think, look, in terms of the parting words that I would say is that the U.S. plays a really important role in this. And so as members of the American Jewish community, you too can kind of join up in this cause in terms of spreading awareness about the fact that this new Middle East is one that's all about opportunity and about the next generation. And so, anything that we could do collectively as the global Jewish community to help perpetuate that, I think makes a big difference. Okay. I hear another question, but I think, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. We woke you up. We really, really appreciate it. It's all good. I could take a few more questions. Once it's 5 o'clock, here's the question. What's another 15 minutes? How expensive is it to visit? Is everything really expensive there? What does it look like when you're a tourist? So I would say, look, the flight is obviously, it's a long flight, so that's expensive. But I think you could do Dubai. You could tour Dubai in a variety of ways, right? So you could definitely do things on you could have the quote unquote Dubai experience, and you can kind of go all out, but there's definitely ways to do it on a more affordable, in a more affordable way, for sure. How long does it take to get from Israel to Dubai? I'm just curious, what's the flight length? 3 hours, and Bahrain is 2. It's actually not so bad. And in the olden days, if you want to talk about miracles, in the olden days, what we used to have to do, because I would go from Israel before, we actually used to have to go to Jordan. And so the thing was, depending on the time of year, and if Israel changed the clocks, oh, by the way, we don't change the clocks out here at all. So if Israel changed the clocks, you basically would get on like a 5:30 or 6:30 Royal Jordanian flight. You'd get into Amman, and then basically by midnight, you'd be anywhere in the GCC. But we used to have to do that. So actually, because of COVID, the first time I went back to Israel was this past January, and that was real goosebumps, because I was like, I can't believe that all these years now I'm finally, flying direct. I see Howie's question.
He wants to know how much it costs to get there.
Yeah, it's very practical. Well, first off, you could do it on, Amex points if you want. But look, right now, I think in general, obviously airline tickets across the board are expensive. But you're probably looking somewhere in the vicinity of like economy, probably close, like, in Israel ticket cost. And I'm sure you've seen this online, but nobody does airfare. Nobody does airline experiences quite like the Gulf. So, the prices kind of go from there. But some of the planes in this region have actual cabins with doors, apartments in the sky. First class on Emirates, you even comes with a shower. So again, you can you could do the experience as you want to do the experience. We have hotels. I get this question a lot. We have all the same American, brands that you're used to, or European ones. We've got Accors, and we've got IHG, and we've got Bonvoy. So, obviously, again, if you want to do it in a more affordable manner, you can do it, on points or whatever. And then we have the full-on, UAE experience, like the Burj Arab, which you've probably seen. That's that building that looks like a sail almost. That's really technically a 5-star, because obviously they're only 5 stars, but it's considered 7-star hotel, which is that's really pretty magnificent. So again, you have to curtail the experience that you want.
So flight costs about the same to Israel that it is to Israel, and then
it starts around there.
It's starting right. I'm saying starting there. Yeah? And then
and we have kosher food on Emirates, by the way. That's another thing to say. We do have kosher food, which also is new. That's after the Accords. So before the Accords, we did not have that luxury. And actually, I one time flew back to the States from Saudi Arabia via Dubai, which meant I had a stopover. Obviously, no kosher food on Saudi either, and that was a really long 21 hours. But now, post Accords, we have that, and it's wonderful. By the way, I should say also that surprisingly, there's a lot of kosher food in the supermarkets in this region. So I was actually, when I was home for the Chagim, I was telling my family that Bowl and Basket, I think is what it's called, that shop, the ShopRite brand. So there's an Instagram page called Kosher in Kuwait, and they actually, on the supermarket shelves in Kuwait, they have Bowl and Basket pasta, which was like kind of shocking. I didn't realize it was an international thing, but all the basically in every one of these countries, because they get a lot of stuff from the UK, whatever. So there's kosher foods actually pretty readily accessible. Actually, the Jewish community of Bahrain has a handle on Instagram at Jewish Bahrain, and every week they tweet from the Bahrain Kosher Corner, as they call it, and they take followers to the supermarket and show them kind of all the same things you would find here. So there's a ton of OU products and Chafkei products and everything like that, which is really cool. And then here in the Emirates, obviously we've got a ton, and we'll soon have this kosher grocery store. So for a teenage girl like me, having our own Galad Express is quite exciting.
Okay, amazing. Thank you very much for